I have in my possession one of the most exciting Canon lenses to come out in the last like 10 years. I'm talking about the 11 to 24 millimeter f4 from Canon. In this video, we're going to be taking a closer look at this really exciting lens. The 11 to 24 is an exciting lens for several reasons. If you're watching this, you probably already know a little bit about it. It is 4 full frame cameras. It's 11 millimeters to 24 millimeters, which has never been done before without being a fisheye lens. This lens is a rectilinear lens, and now what that means is that you're going to get an image that is not heavily distorted like a fisheye lens or like a GoPro, something like that. It's going to be super wide angle, which will introduce some distortions, but that's going to have more to do with the angle that you're shooting. But it's not going to have that typical fisheye lens look. So I'm sure you've seen other videos, and there's tons of them out there reviewing this lens, talking about sharpness and how it performs sharpness wise. So in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the practicality of using this lens. Is it a focal length that we are going to use very often? Is it enjoyable to use? Am I getting good results from it? Stuff like that. So in this video, we're going to be comparing it heavily to the 16 to 35 millimeter f2.8 from Canon. It's kind of its direct competition as far as L lens land. So we're going to be comparing those lenses heavily, and we're going to see which one is the winner. So let's head out here, take some photographs, and compare the two. So here is the lens in question. This is the Canon 11 to 24 millimeter f4. As you can see, this is a very, very large lens. It weighs, I'll put the exact specs up here, but I believe it's over 4 pounds. It is over a pound heavier than the 16 to 35. It is a very beefy lens. Size-wise, it's fairly compact. It's not as long as you might think by the weight. It's a very compact, but you can see that there is just a ton of glass in this thing, and that's part of what makes it so beefy. 11 millimeters is very, very wide. I'll put up some example images here of the difference between 11 millimeters and 16 millimeters. I know one of the first questions that I had was, what does 11 millimeters even look like? What does that look like compared to my 16 millimeter lens that I'm kind of used to that focal length? So here we have the 11 millimeters, and then here we have 16 millimeters, and you can see the difference that makes. So a few features of this lens. You can see that this front element is very large and very bulbous. It really protrudes out, and because of that, you're not able to use filters with it. And it has a built-in lens hood that's just there all the time, and which means that the lens cap, it looks like this. It actually goes over the top of your lens hood like this. This lens cap feels pretty flimsy. It's a very thin plastic that they use, and I worry that this lens hood is going to get scuffed up from this lens cap going over it over and over and over. So I worry a little bit about that. One of the most concerning downsides to this particular lens is its inability to thread a filter on it. You're not going to ever be able to thread a filter on here because of the bulbous nature of the front element. You can, however, put filters on the back element here in this little square slot that's provided. But you're never going to be able to use polarizers in that way because there's no way you could turn it. So polarizers are out. So in order to put filters on this, you're going to have to use like a Wonder Pana or a Lee filter system. One of the filter systems that go over the front element, and they have these large square glass plates that go over it. Now, the downside to that is that these plates are going to be very large, And the larger they are, the more expensive they are, and the more room they take up in your bag. So that's definitely that's definitely a downside. The geese love this lens though. So what am I thinking of this lens so far? It's really fun to use. 11 millimeters is really, really wide. It's got a very close minimum focus distance. I'll put that right here. So you can get really close to your subject. And one of the added bonuses that I didn't really foresee is the amount of depth of field that you gain by having such a wide focal length. I found that in a lot of situations where I would normally have to focus stack in order to gain full depth of field, I was easily obtaining that using apertures of like f11 and f14. So you gain a lot of depth of field using these really wide focal lengths. So using this in live view, I actually discovered that it's kind of hard for live view to focus. And part of that is because it's an f4, and another part is that it is so wide angle that the details are very far away, and it's kind of hard for live view to find those contrasts, the areas of contrast. So I found myself manually focusing it a lot. Now, using it handheld and focusing through the viewfinder, it does great. It's really sharp. The results from this are really sharp. And here in a second, we'll hop over to Lightroom and take a look at a few images. But I'm really liking the lens. We're gonna kind of use it a little bit more here and see it in action and compare the results between it and the 16-35, which is kind of my go-to lens. This should kind of illustrate the difference between 16 millimeters and 11 millimeters. Here we have 16 millimeters. It's still incredibly wide. But if we go all the way out to 11 millimeters, you can see that's a fairly substantial difference. Again, we'll zoom back into 16 here and look at that difference. It's a pretty large difference. So 11 millimeters is really great for getting a really prominent foreground element. Like the minimum focus distance on this particular lens is so close that you can really just exaggerate a foreground element, especially if you're shooting in a vertical orientation. It's amazing how much you can draw the viewer in with a foreground element. So it's really cool for that. Like 11 millimeters is almost like a vertical panorama when you're shooting vertical like this. So I really like using it like in the vertical orientation. So we're gonna snap a couple shots here, and then we'll switch over to the 16-35 and show you guys the sharpness differences here. Now I find that the infinity mark on this lens is really accurate, so that's kind of nice. I'm gonna go ahead and fire off my bracketed sequence. So this is at f16. We'll go ahead and shoot it at f8. Take a look at that as well. Okay, now I'm gonna switch over to the 16-35 and we'll check that out. Okay, so now I'm also filming with the 11-24, so you can get a sense for image quality there as well. So we're gonna fire off a few shots here using the 16-35 at 16 millimeters. Fire off our bracketed sequence. So there's our f8 images. And here's our f16 images. And you can see the difference in the field of view as well. So now we're going to go back to the computer and take a look at these images and see what we think. This one has a little bit of processing done. This is done with the 11-24 at 24 millimeters. And as we zoom in, you can see that there is some sharpness added in this one. But you can see that the detail is quite good. But let's go over to the straight out of camera shots and compare those. So this is the 11-24 at f16. As we zoom in here at 100%, you can see that it's pretty sharp. corners, we're starting to get some stretchy, weird stuff going on, but that's to be expected with a super wide angle lens like this in the corners. Let's take a look at f8. You can see we still got a little bit of weirdness in the corners, but tack sharp. Obviously this is the brightest of my 3 bracketed shots just because I wanted to be able to see the detail in the trees. But you can see there's no lens corrections being applied, and really I'm not seeing hardly any chromatic aberration, which is really good for a wide angle lens like this. Okay, now let's jump over to the 16 to 35. As we toggle between these two lenses, look at the perspective difference. That is pretty huge. 16 to 35 is very wide by itself, but 11 millimeters is just nuts wide. So that's what I meant by getting a very unique perspective, because there's just not a lot of shots quite that wide out there. So as we zoom in 1:1, you can see that 16 to 35 is also very sharp. But if we compare it to, this is at f16, we'll go to f8, compare the two. Performs definitely better at f8. We're starting to get a little bit of diffraction at f16. It just softens the tiniest bit. Now if we go over to the 11 to 24 at f8 and toggle between the two, obviously, you know, there's a perspective change there, but I want to say that there's just more detail in this 11 to 24. It's crisper and sharper. Get over here into the hillside, and it just looks a little soft by comparison on the 16 to 35. 11 to 24, I think it's safe to say it's sharper. So a couple other images I took with this. I was just having lots of fun shooting this wide. This is 2 focus stacked images here. One where I focused on our tractor once it goes sharp here, this cat, and this is at f11, and then once focusing on this foreground. A little architectural shot. You can get such fun cartoony distortions going on when you're shooting this wide. And then as I was saying, shooting vertically at 11 millimeters, you can really get some pretty cool effects by really exaggerating whatever leading lines you have. So what are my final thoughts on this lens? The first thing is the image quality, I think you will agree, is excellent coming out of this lens. It's very sharp. I would say it's sharper than my 16 to 35, which is a very sharp lens in itself. The corners perform pretty well. It's really a lot of fun to use. You get such a unique, cool perspective. It's really a very different look. And if you're wanting to separate your photography from other people's, you know, a different focal length like this is a great way to do it. Now, all of this comes at a cost. The first cost is that it's a $3,000 lens, which is out of the reach of many hobbyist photographers. The second cost is that it is so heavy. This lens is approaching a 70 to 200 in weight. Granted, it's about a pound less, but when I was using it and then I switched back to my 16 to 35, my 16 to 35 felt like a kit lens by comparison. And this is a 2.8. If you were to compare this to a 16 to 35 f4, the difference would be even greater. So if you're somebody that's thinking about downsizing your kit, this is a step in the wrong direction. This is a very large, very heavy lens. So who would this lens be for? This lens would be for the real estate photographer. It's hard to get any wider than this, and if you're photographing small spaces, a wide angle lens like this can really do quite a bit. The landscape photographer that doesn't do a lot of backpacking or long, dangerous hikes into the wilderness, I think if you're, you know, shooting from parking lots and stuff like that, or you don't mind the extra weight, this lens won't be a nightmare. But if you're somebody that is thinking about downsizing your gear and wants to cut down on weight, this lens is not for you. It is very, very heavy. Also, if you use a lot of filters, you have to keep in mind that putting a filter in front of this is going to be a very expensive ordeal, because you're going to have to invest in either a Lee system, a Wonder Pana, I believe there's a couple others, probably Stingray. And not only are those plates that you put in front of this lens very large, they're going to be very expensive. So, you know, you're going to have that extra space needed in your bag for your lens, your filters. You're going to have the extra cost. So none of your other filters are likely going to work, because it's going to take a very large filter to cover this. Now, you can put a filter back behind the back element, and that would work for neutral density filters, and that's about it. You're not going to be able to put a polarizer back here or some kind of graduated filter. So you can put neutral density filters back here. I don't have a great source for that, but it can be done. I've seen other videos of people doing it, so it can be done. That's something to look at if you're thinking about buying this lens. So yeah, I like the lens. I don't think this lens is for me, but to rent, this is the perfect lens to rent. You can rent it, test it out, see what you think of it, see if the weight is as big an issue for you as it was for me. And if you want to rent this, you can go over to BrentRentsLenses.com and use the offer code Nick at checkout, and you're going to get, I believe it's 10% off. So check this lens out, review it for yourself, see what you think. It's sharp, it's fun, it's heavy, and it's expensive. So it's the perfect type of lens to rent, in my opinion. All right. Thanks so much, guys, for watching the video. And make sure you like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you later. Bye-bye.